Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on summer employment and international students. My name is Catherine Gillard-Miles, and I use she, her pronouns. I serve as the Associate Director for Student Advising and Counseling in International Student Scholar Services. And I am joined by my colleague, Lisa. Lisa, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Ziegler. I use she, her pronouns, and my role with ISSS is as our CEBA specialist.
And we're excited to have you all join us today to talk about this topic. This webinar is intended for University of Minnesota staff, and so we'll be talking about what it looks like to work with students and navigate some of the employment questions and situations that come up from a staff perspective. Lisa, do you want to go on to the next slide? So our agenda for today is to talk about some of the basics of international student employment. And we'll also talk about situations that involve new students. We'll talk about graduating students and what happens next after graduation and the options there. And then we'll also get to your questions. If you do think of a question during the webinar today, please feel free to put it into the Q&A box so that we have it ready to go at the end of the webinar.
All right, well, I will get us started with the basics. And we're going to start very basic with who is an international student. So there are a lot of different ways to define an international student. We see students with a number of different visa types and statuses at the University of Minnesota, and each status has its own employment rules. So for the purposes of today's presentation, we are talking specifically about students with an F1 or J1 visa type who are under the university sponsorship, meaning their visa document, their I-20 or DS-2019, was issued by the University of Minnesota. Another basic question is, well, how many hours per week can an international student work on campus? Many of you here may already know the answer to this question. You may be very familiar with the rules about this. But for those who aren't, generally speaking, from an immigration perspective, international students can work up to 20 hours per week while school is in session. And generally, there are no limits to the number of hours students can work on campus during university breaks. Now, there are some university policy restrictions that place stricter limits on the number of hours that an international student can work in a week, depending on the job classification. So, most notably, perhaps, is the policy for graduate students in student job classifications. While the immigration regulations allow them to work up to 20 hours per week, the university policy limits them to 14 hours per week. There are also stricter limits on when a new student can begin employment in a student job in some cases, and that segues into our next slide, which is all about new students and on-campus summer employment. So I somewhat routinely will get a question from departments. We have a fall admit international student that we want to hire over the summer. Can we? And in this slide, we will cover what conditions must be met for a new student to begin employment and some of the limitations. So there are some steps that all new international students must complete before they can begin working on campus over the summer. They must have their University of Minnesota I-20 or DS-2019. They must have arrived in the US in their student visa status, and they must have completed their ISSS new student requirements. We call them the New Global Gopher required tasks, or I think in many departments it is known as the ISSS check-in. So after a student completes their New Global Gopher tasks, we update the visa panel in PeopleSoft, which many of you may be very familiar with, and that is where we show that the F1 status has been granted, meaning the student is authorized to work on campus. Now, we recommend that new students arrive at least 1 week before their intended employment start date to allow sufficient time to complete their ISSS new student requirements and for their submission to be reviewed and approved by ISSS. Now, while a new international student can begin on-campus summer employment after completing these must items, there are some additional steps that will help make the E-Verify process go more smoothly. Now, every year we hear from students and departments about tentative non-confirmation notices, or TNCs, that resulted from a new student's SEVIS record not being active. Now, ISSS does have a process in place to activate CVIS records of new students after they arrive and complete their tasks. But prior to the start of the semester, it is a manual process, and it requires ISSS staff to verify that the student is enrolled full-time and has provided a valid US mailing address. And as of last summer, we have been able to send a notification to students when their CVIS record becomes active, or at least to those who report through the Global Gopher tasks that they have on campus employment. And this has been great as it takes a lot of the guesswork out of when the TNC can be resolved without ISSS even needing to be contacted. And this is another reason that we strongly recommend students arrive well in advance of their employment start date to allow time for these ideal tasks to be done. Now, of course, not all new international students are eligible for on-campus employment for the entire summer. Fall admits who are able to fulfill these must requirements are F1 students who have already been living in the US in F1 status. These are students who are either transferring their F1 record from another US institution to the U of M, or they're U of M students who recently completed one degree and are about to start another. So basically, they're students who are allowed to remain in the US over the summer in their F1 status. So the reason that those are the types of students we see who can work all summer is because there are limitations in the visa regulations on other groups of students. One of those limitations is arrival dates. Now, students who are new to studying in the US cannot arrive more than 30 days before their program start date. And we cannot change the program start date based on a summer employment opportunity. It has to be based on when the academic program begins. Term of admission can also be a limiting factor in the number of hours per week a student can work. So for summer admits is who we're talking about here. When the term of admission is summer, that makes summer a required term of enrollment and limits the number of hours a student can work during the week to 20 over the summer. And then there are also those HR limitations that I mentioned in the previous slide about how far in advance of the start of the semester a new student may begin to start working in certain types of positions. All right, pass it on to Catherine.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have students who are graduating. These are students who are graduating and either moving on from studies at the University of Minnesota, or sometimes they're graduating and moving into a new program at the U. For these students, while a student is enrolled in classes, they are eligible to work on campus without special authorization. Once a student has graduated, their work authorization stops, and they need to take additional steps if they want to continue working on campus. What those steps are depends on what they are doing next, and we'll talk a little bit more about those next steps in a minute. In the past, we have seen departments who are caught off guard by the end of a student's work eligibility. This is especially true for students whose final degree requirements hinge on the completion of a thesis or a project rather than just coursework. Coursework can have a clear end date, but the completion date for a student who is doing a thesis or a project may be somewhat uncertain until the student is done. We strongly encourage students and their departments to discuss what a realistic graduation date might be so that both parties can plan ahead to the greatest extent possible. So for students who are moving on from the university, they generally need to apply for a post-graduation work authorization. For our F1 students, which is the majority of our international students, they would be applying for something called optional practical training, or OPT. This process can take 2 to 3 months or more sometimes. And so students generally need to plan far in advance if they want to avoid gaps in work authorization. There is an option to pay a hefty fee to US Citizenship and Immigration Services to expedite the process. So there may be opportunities to go through this a little bit more quickly, but for students to be able to have the most affordable option, we encourage them to apply early and to plan in advance. Next slide, please. For our students who are moving on to a new program, they will need an updated visa document or an updated I-20 if they're an F1 student for that new program. This is also true of our J students. They need an updated DS 2019. These students are often referred to as change of level degree students within ISSS. The most common scenario is a bachelor's degree that's being completed in spring and then students going into a graduate program in the fall. But we also see students who are completing, say, a master's degree in the spring and then going on to a PhD program in the fall. These students are allowed to work on campus in between programs. However, to maintain their eligibility, they need to request their new visa document. If they don't have their new visa document, they cannot continue working on campus over the summer. And so it's really important that students plan in advance and request this document in a timely fashion. If students haven't requested it, then the work authorization ends, and that can create some of the same problems that we see with students who are graduating and haven't applied for OPT yet. Once the new I-20 or DS 2018 is obtained by the student, then we complete the new I-9 and resume on-campus employment. So we hope that this information is helpful for you and the students that you're working with so that you can plan for this summer and beyond to help students know when they can start their employment and to plan appropriately for your department and the opportunities within it. What questions do you have today? I know that we saw at least one in the Q&A. Lisa, did you want to look at that one?
Yeah, the question is, please clarify if I heard you correctly that students undergrad can only work up to 14 hours a week during school times. I apologize if I misspoke. I meant to say that my understanding of the university policy is that graduate students in student job classifications are limited to the 14 hours per week, whereas the immigration regulations allow up to 20 hours per week. I'm not an expert on university policy for job classifications, but that is my understanding of the policy. Are there any other questions? If nothing else one more is coming in through the Q&A. Does summer semester count as a university break? Catherine, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. For most of our students, summer semester does count as a university break. As Lisa mentioned during the beginning of the presentation, there are some differences for students who are starting in the summer. That the summer break would not be applicable for students who are summer admit, but for most of our continuing students, the summer semester would count as a university break.
We have no other questions in the Q&A at this time. We do have plenty more time to take questions. We just got another one in, so if you think of any more, please put them in the Q&A. Catherine, were you going to say something?
There's another question that popped into the Q&A. One more.
All right, we're getting some more here. All right, I think with the new CBA, GAs are not hourly, right? How to do hours per week limits apply to graduate assistants who earn a stipend that is a standard disbursement, assuming 20 hours per week, but where in practice the hours fluctuate based on TA needs. Catherine, are you able to answer that question?
Sure. So I've looked at the collective bargaining agreement for our graduate assistants. I don't remember all the details off of the top of my head. Generally speaking, graduate assistants they have a percentage appointment. There may be some other types of graduate employment that are hourly. But when there's a flat appointment, students are often earning that stipend. And we understand that in practice, hours may fluctuate, but the regulations cap international students at 20 hours per week. And so that should be the maximum amount that they are ever working. So even if students aren't clocking in and clocking out, they still need to be tracking their hours and not going over that 20-hour per week limit.
Let's see what we got here. All right, we have a question about the job verification form for the Social Security application. Can you talk about the job verification form that is needed for F1 students? Catherine, would you like to take that as well?
Sure, I
Or would you
can.
like me to talk about that?
Why don't you? I took the last one. You can go ahead and answer that.
Sure. Yeah, so the job verification form for F1 students is required for the Social Security application for F1 students who are working on campus. And so once a student has an on-campus job offer that will start within 30 days or less, they can apply for their Social Security number, and that job verification form is one of the required application documents. And it is a paper form. That is a Social Security Administration requirement, and it has to have ink signatures on it. And so it starts with the hiring department printing the job verification form on their letterhead and completing section 1, that is for the employer. And then the student takes that and brings it to ISSS to complete section 2. It has to have an ink signature from both the hiring department and the international office. Um, let's see. Are the summer session employment dates different for graduate students versus undergrads? The summer session employment dates are based off of the university's academic calendar. There are a couple of programs that don't follow the general academic calendar, is my understanding. There's a couple with slightly earlier start dates or slightly later end dates. But I'd say overall, the answer to this question is it's the same for everyone. It's based on the academic calendar. See what else we have in the chat. Whose responsibility is it to track their hours to stay within the maximum hours during the academic semesters? Catherine, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Ultimately, it's the student's responsibility to track their hours. The students are responsible for their status, and part of that is making sure that they're staying within the work limitations of their status. And so it's ultimately up to the student. I think it can be helpful for departments to be aware of how many hours a student is working. I think that might be a little bit easier if students are clocking in and out. But if students are working, if they are getting close to that maximum number of hours, there may also be further conversations to be had within the department about the student's workload, especially in something like a graduate assistantship. So I think there could be some collective responsibility, but ultimately it's the student's responsibility to track those. So I see that there's another question in the chat. What is communicated with undergraduate international students in terms of working on campus? We hire a lot of freshman undergraduate students. Are there good resources I should direct them to? Are they expected to know and keep track of their hours to remain under the policy? Or is this something the manager / payroll admin should be keeping an eye on? I think I answered the last part of that question. But Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about IPREP and how students learn about the limitations of on-campus work for their status?
Sure. Yeah. So ultimately, a student's status, staying within status, is the student's responsibility. And this is the message that ISSS conveys to our students. But also, ISSS plays a large role with educating students about the requirements. And so even before a student arrives, we have several materials that communicate what the employment rules are to students. We have our International Student Preparation course that goes into detail about the employment rules, and we have another quiz about the employment regulations upon a student's arrival. We also have we have really good information on our website. And when students contact us with questions, we'll refer them there. And of course, our advisors are available to help with any additional questions that students have as they are navigating the employment rules for their visa status.
Just some additional questions about the total number of hours that students can work. There's a question about volunteer work and whether that counts towards the 20-hour limit. Generally not. If volunteer work is truly volunteer work, someone is going out to um, walk dogs for an animal shelter, or they're volunteering to hand out snacks at the end of a 5K. That does not count towards their work authorization limits. If students are volunteering and it's more of an unpaid internship, that might be something that counts towards that 20-hour limit. But if students have questions about a particular opportunity and whether or not it counts, I would encourage them to come in and talk to an advisor. There is also a question about whether or not the 20 hours includes all student jobs combined and not per job. That is correct. The 20-hour per week limit is cumulative across all opportunities. Students can't have three jobs with 20 hours per week each, for a total of 60 hours over the week. It is 20 hours total across all opportunities. There's a general question about work authorization for J1 students, and what that authorization process looks like. For J students who are working on campus, there's a reporting process through what we call My ISSS. For post-graduation, there is a request process also through My ISSS. And many of these processes look similar. For F1 students don't necessarily need to report their employment, on-campus employment. But the post-graduation work authorization request process does look similar within My ISSS. There's another question. Lisa, you were talking about the employment verification form. When you said an ink signature is needed from the department on the job verification form, does this need to come from HR or from the supervisor?
Yes, I am pulling up the form right now to see exactly what it says on there. It just says employer signature. And so either would be appropriate. It could be, I'd say most commonly it is the supervisor, but it could also be an HR professional with the hiring department.
There's another question I think relates to what you were talking about in terms of IPREP, Lisa. Is the employment training required for all international students or just the ones who are interested in having on-campus positions?
Yeah, so the International Student Preparation course and our other immigration regulations quiz and education for students is for all international students. And actually, both of those things are required for all new international students. Whether they are interested in working or not, we are making sure that they get the information or that the information is provided, at least. We can't, you know, make them read it, but we do make sure that they have access to the information and we require them to review it and complete it. Our final question in the Q&A was just a thank you. If there are, oh, thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you for your very good questions and for your time and attention. Catherine, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. Thank you all for coming. We are always open to questions. We would prefer to get questions beforehand and help you figure out what needs to happen rather than trying to resolve situations after they've happened. So please, if you have questions about whether or not a student should be working or could be working, reach out to us. Our main email address is isss@umn.edu. We are happy to be a resource for both you and your students. If students do have questions about their options, they can reach out to us. We have drop-in advising most days during the week, either virtually or in person. We also have scheduled appointments. And so if you are working with a student who has specific questions about their situation, you're welcome to send them to us. We are also here to help support you as our colleagues here at the university in navigating opportunities for employment for our international students. We want to help you create those opportunities and extend those opportunities to international students. So please reach out with any questions. We're happy to answer them. And we hope that you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you for joining us today.